It was a quick fight with Israel. Now Hezbollah is said to be using the latest tension to bolster an image tarnished by fighting alongside the Syrian regime. Will the latest exchange benefit or further isolate Hezbollah? And how will it play out in Lebanon? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zaidan. It's the most serious outbreak of violence between Israel and the Lebanese Shia group Hezbollah in years. 2 Israeli soldiers were killed when Hezbollah fired missiles at a military convoy. Israel launched artillery and airstrikes. A UN peacekeeper was killed too. The Hezbollah attack is widely seen as retaliation for an Israeli airstrike that killed several Hezbollah fighters in southern Syria earlier this month. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is warning the armed group it'll pay the full price, he says, for the attack. Well, before we get to our discussion, Nicole Johnston helped set things up from Wazani on the blue line between Israel and Lebanon.
This isn't the first time that Hezbollah has carried out an attack inside the Shaba Farms area behind me, but it's certainly the boldest that we've seen since 2006. Now, the attack happened just below the army post that you can see on the hill in the distance, and it will go some way to restoring the image of Hezbollah as a fighting force, as a resistance movement against Israel. For the last few years, people in Lebanon have seen Hezbollah sending thousands of fighters into Syria to fight on the same side as Syria's president, Bashar al-Assad. And many people in Lebanon believe that Hezbollah's role in Syria has led to the war spilling over in Lebanon and has increased the sectarian tension here. Now, the argument from Hezbollah is that its role and its fight in Syria is still part of its broader war and campaign against Israel. On Friday, Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, will have a chance to make that argument. He'll be speaking in front of a large rally in southern Beirut and emphasising, no doubt, that the movement's primary aim is still its war against Israel.
The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah is further complicated because it's happening in a disputed region. Shaba Farms is a 25-kilometre stretch of land that's on the borders of Lebanon, Israel and Syria. The area has been occupied by Israel since the 1967 war. But Lebanon and Syria are both on the record as saying it's part of Lebanese territory. They say Israel should have left the farms when it withdrew from Lebanon in 2000. In 2006, there was a 34-day war between Hezbollah and Israel. Hundreds of people were killed before a United Nations resolution helped end the conflict. But Shaba Farms remains vulnerable to violence, as evidenced by Wednesday's attack and counter-attack. Well, let's bring in our guests. All 3 of them are in Beirut. We have Kamel Wezni, a political analyst and the founder of the Center for American Strategic Studies in Beirut. Bassem Shab, a member of parliament in Lebanon for the Future Movement. And Nicholas Snow, the co-founder of MideastWire.com. Welcome to you all. If we could start with Kamel, is this border exchange over now?
Well, it seems at this point it's over, but it's never over when it's a confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel. This is a long confrontation. Eventually, it will come to a real war between the two confronting entity. My estimate, it could be just a cessation of hostility at this point, but eventually everybody is building up to have the real confrontation, and this will be the easiest things for Hezbollah to fight the Israeli. Obviously, at this point, maybe Mr. Netanyahu, I'm not sure if he's willing to swallow this major defeat if he doesn't
But
retaliate.
Kamel, Israeli officials are saying the signals they're getting via the UN from Hezbollah is that they don't want this to go any further right now.
Well, this is the statement that the Israeli is actually sending to their media. So far, we haven't heard the Hezbollah statement. Tomorrow, we will hear the statement of Hezbollah. And my understanding and my study of Hezbollah, the rhetoric is going to be very high. The rhetoric that has been coming from Iran, from Hezbollah, from very high-ranking leader of the resistance, saying they want the destruction of Israel. And I'm sure that's what they meant.
All right, Nicholas, regardless of the rhetoric, In reality, does Israel or Hezbollah, do either of them have any appetite right now for further escalation and military conflict?
Well, we saw by the sudden de-escalation in the last, 12 hours, 20 hours or so, that obviously neither side at this point wants to engage in a series of tit-for-tat skirmishes that could easily lead to a much wider conflict on the order of a kind of fourth Lebanon war following the war in 2006. So that seems evident. Both of these sides don't want it. What also seems evident is that the Americans don't want it, that the Iranians don't want it, and that there are a number of other actors that don't want a great conflagration here right now. But that said, that's right now. As we know, in the coming weeks, there are a lot of issues on the agenda in a number of states. You have the Israeli elections. You have the supposed deadline for Iranian-U.S. negotiations. You have a new chief of staff of the Israeli army coming on board. And you have many martyrdom ceremonies for people that have fallen, not least Rafi Hariri, who was assassinated here in 2005, and Imad Moghnieh, the Hezbollah commander, who was assassinated in 2006 in Damascus, whose son was just killed by the Israelis in the Golan Heights a while ago. So a lot of things can change, and that's why I would agree with your previous guess that this round may be over, but the likelihood of another conflict and conflagration on a much wider axis now, stretching right into southern Syria and the occupied Golan Heights, is just right around the corner, and it's a matter of the key headline here: stopping this war in Syria. Without stopping the war in Syria, we're going to have more and more of these different angles and different potentials of violence. That's extremely dangerous for everyone.
All right, we should perhaps also focus a little bit, as we're talking about, of course, the battlefield, perhaps we should talk a little bit about the political fallout from this. And just to put some context and background into the show, let's remind ourselves Lebanon hasn't had a president since May of last year. In that time, they have made 18 attempts to elect a new head of state, but have failed to reach a consensus each time. At the heart of the dispute is a struggle among the different communities in Lebanon for power. Now, when it comes to power, a political convention from 1943 says Christian Maronites get the top job, the presidency. The Prime Minister is supposed to be a Sunni Muslim, and the Speaker of Parliament is meant to be a Shia Muslim. Well, that said, it seems, though, that the changing demographics mean some communities are now unhappy with the amount of power influence that they've been given. Let's turn to Bassem. Will this latest military exchange, Bassem, impact the dialogue that's going on between Hezbollah and Sunnis, between the different factions of Lebanese politics, to try and end the political deadlock in the country?
Let me say that I think it has had an impact, and it will have an impact in making Hezbollah more flexible. Let me add that the ingredients today are not for an all-out war. We are not in 2006. The U.S. administration in 2006 was fully in support of the Israeli government, something which we do not have, and clearly the Israeli leadership realizes they cannot launch an all-out war on Hezbollah without American approval.
Well, but Bassem, how has this made Hezbollah more flexible when it comes to negotiations inside Lebanese politics?
Hezbollah realizes now that its involvement in Syria has compromised it with a vast majority of the Lebanese and with the Sunnis in particular. So if Hezbollah is to engage in an all-out confrontation with Israel, it will not have the domestic support that it had in 2006. We've seen in the dialogue between the Future Movement and Hezbollah flexibility on a number of issues. They may seem minor, but they denote a certain change in mood, taking out posters, giving more authority to the Lebanese internal security forces, giving more credibility to the Lebanese armed forces. So we have seen domestically flexibility with the opposing parties in Lebanon. And I think Hezbollah was very careful to retaliate from an area that would not jeopardize the state of Lebanon from a legal point of view. Hezbollah realizes they cannot launch an all-out war and take the impact of a destructive retaliatory response from Israel.
Okay.
And their involvement in Syria, which as a future member of parliament in the future bloc, we've said that this involvement in Syria has flared up sectarian tensions. So Hezbollah wants a very quiet domestic front. The last thing they want is a major confrontation with Israel, which was why the response was very measured.
We'll talk about where it launched, where Hezbollah launched the attack from, the significance of that in a moment. But I want to go back to Kamel. We have heard criticism coming from some Lebanese factional leaders, Samir Jaja, amongst others, even the Future Bloc, saying, making a veiled criticism, very thinly veiled criticism of Hezbollah, saying no party really has the right to hijack the decision of war and peace from the government. Despite whatever signals of flexibility Hezbollah may be showing on some issues, do you think that when it comes to the military exchange, that this may upset the feelings of trust which are trying to be established in the dialogue process?
Well, this is not new, that there is no consensus in the role of resistance in Lebanon. Those people always, they have their objection to the operation of Hezbollah and to the resistance in Lebanon. Even in 2006, there was no consensus on the operation that Hezbollah launched. But nevertheless, Hezbollah is there. The Israeli came to Lebanon and assassinated other member of Hezbollah, Al-Laqis. He was assassinated maybe like less than a year. He was assassinated in the suburb of Dahi. He was actually a high-ranking member of Hezbollah, and the Israeli been trying to assassinate other people in Lebanon. The fact that they did the latest assassination inside Syria doesn't mean that Israel will not be held accountable for what it does.
Perhaps it doesn't come, but I think that the point from the perspective
of Hezbollah,
forgive me, but I think
Hezbollah is a defending, it's a deterring forces in Lebanon.
Right, but the point that some of the other factions, if you allow me, the point which some of the other factions are making is that while, for example, Mohammed Raad, the Hezbollah member of parliament, talks about how his group wants decision-making by consensus, the retaliation and the response to the sort of actions you're talking about is being made unilaterally rather than through a consensual decision through Lebanese institutions.
That's what I said. There was no consensus on the role of the resistance from the beginning of the resistance, from 1982 when.
But now Hezbollah is trying to build that,
Beirut and
right?
And
now Hezbollah is trying to build that consensus. Doesn't it undermine the trust?
He actually tried to build it. He knows he's not going to get it, and the force that it is in the south is a deterrent force, and everybody accepted as part of the government. So regardless of the consensus, there is an imminent threat in our border, and that imminent threat is coming from Israel, and everybody understand that Hezbollah role in defending the country is very crucial at this point. The fact that Hezbollah took the operation in Shib'a Farm does not actually negate the 1701, which is obligating Lebanon to abide by the cessation of hostility. Shib'a Farm is another area, disputed area. It still go back to the 1996, where it's an occupied land, and two forces can attack each other against military. So Hezbollah actually reserving and understanding the Lebanese politics, and for that he did not come and make this operation from an area under the UNIFIL.
All right, that's an interesting point. I want to take that to Bassem and say, we've also heard statements from the Future Bloc talking about how you want all parties, that's the bloc, of course, you're associated with, all parties should respect 1701. What do you make of the argument of Kamel there, that the fact that Hezbollah launched the attack from Shib'a Farms means 1701 was not violated?
It's a legal point. We do admit, as the Future Party, that the Shib'a Farms are Lebanese territories, and the operation was done beyond the blue line in a disputed area. But the fact is that the operation was done in
Lebanese territory.
It is Lebanese territory. Yes.
Yes, it is, but occupied territory.
But yeah. That's what I said.
That's a very critical point.
But okay. Let's let Bassem finish the thought.
But the thing is that this operation was done in retaliation to something that did not happen on Lebanese territories. This is Hezbollah has entangled us in a Syrian civil war, and now we're entangled in an Israeli-Iranian confrontation that is playing out in the Golan Heights. And Lebanon, in its bid to disengage from the Syrian conflict, also wants to disengage from this axis of
assassinated
resistance.
in the suburb of Beirut, and he was killed by an Israeli agent. So it's not that the retaliation is not only for Jihad Mughni, it's for all of those people who were assassinated by the Israeli, whether in the suburb of Beirut or other places in Lebanon.
Is not, so does not represent
okay,
the state
Kamel, you made
Lebanon.
that point. Let's give Bassem, I'll give you just 20 seconds before we move on, please.
Yes. I mean, the thing is, in the broader picture, Hezbollah is now not a resistance force, but a deterrent force. And in their reassurances to the Israelis via UNIFIL that if you don't hit us, we will not hit you. The retaliation was not against a violation of Lebanese sovereignty. It was against an event that took place in the Golan Heights.
Well, so Bassem, I'm intrigued here. What do you make of Kamel's argument that there are Israeli violations of Lebanese sovereignty, attacks, violations of the airspace? There's quite a list. And the fact remains that Lebanon doesn't have consensus, or some would say even the military capability to respond to those violations, and that's a justification.
But Hezbollah had a government which it controlled for more than 2 years and did nothing to these violations.
Right.
So to put the blame on somebody else is a moot point. The question is, the deterrence of Hezbollah, is it a Lebanese deterrence or is it part of an Iranian deterrence and part of the axis of resistance?
All right, let's take the discussion.
Don't want that.
Let's take the discussion to Nicholas. No, there is an underlying question that this always comes back to, Nicholas. Can there be any real move towards reconciliation inside Lebanon while Syria burns? Can parties really talk about things like not only choosing a new president, but some of the basic institutions, empowering institutions, a new electoral law, really giving power to the Lebanese state over factions, while no one's really sure what's going to happen in Syria?
I think that's a point well taken, but I would generally let your Lebanese guests answer that because it's really for them to decide and for them to comment on. I would just say that right now,
well, I don't want you to decide it, but I want you to give us a perspective on whether it's possible to expect, whether it's realistic to expect that will be resolved while Syria burns.
A lot of that depends on the way the Lebanese actors calculate this. But what I can say is that, as the Member of Parliament from the Mustaqbal already knows, there is a functioning government right now with Hezbollah and the Future Movement actually working in close cooperation, especially on security matters, to try and hold this deluge on Syria, from Syria and on the border, back from Lebanon. And that's something that's in some ways unprecedented. It is effective. It's working. And despite some of the legalistic, well-taken arguments by the Future Movement MP and your other guests, the back and forth there, the reality is, thank goodness, that there is a functioning cooperation which you actually don't see in many other of the Arab states in the region, many of whose systems are actually falling apart more and more by the day. So first of all, the thing to say is that there is a functioning consensus that can at least help hold the line against the Syria conflict. To go to your real root of your question, though, without resolving the Syria conflict, without ending this war in Syria, it will be extremely difficult as more and more layers of this conflict are added, as more and more problems and more potential for miscalculation happens. It's going to be exceedingly difficult for any of these local parties, including a very powerful one like Hezbollah, to try and actually hold this country up and hold it off from the threats that are lurking at its southern border and all along and around it in Syria. It's enveloped at this point. That was one of the interesting things of the last 24 hours. In the 2006 war, Lebanese citizens, at least most of them, had the ability, if they wanted to leave the country and go through Syria, for example, to try and escape the Israeli assault on Lebanon. That doesn't exist anymore. The country is essentially enveloped. The Lebanese have to work together. The international community has to help them. And indeed, many of these states are actually in an unprecedented way, especially when it comes to intelligence cooperation. That needs to be deepened, but it will never succeed, and it will always be open to extreme bouts of unrest and possible big conflagrations if we don't end this war in Syria with a political settlement. That's the imperative.
All right, that's a big challenge.
Kamel,
I want to go back to one point here. I understand the history of Israeli involvement in Lebanon and attacks and assassinations and so on. But if we go back to the January 18th strike that killed Hezbollah members in Syria, you know, the latest big one, which provoked the vows for revenge, there is a question which is raised. I think it was sort of raised there by Bassem as well. Why didn't Hezbollah retaliate from positions inside Syria, which we know they have, rather than from the Shabaa farms?
Well, a lot of people expected that Hezbollah would retaliate from that area. There's talk that he actually launched a couple missiles from that area. And I'm sure there is a lot of operation was taking place in that area between Hezbollah and against Takfiri, which is backed clearly by the Israeli. So at this point, I think there is an open front between Israel and Hezbollah can maneuver with flexibility without jeopardizing the 1701. I think Hezbollah studied its movement and decided this is a space where he can operate and make a surprise against the Israeli. So the Israeli, they were shocked and surprised by this attack, and as we know now, they don't know how to respond to this attack. But my understanding, this disputed Lebanese land is still occupied by the Israeli, and as long as it is occupied, Hezbollah has the right to attack the Israeli until they withdraw from that part of Lebanese territory. So this is an open conflict between Lebanon and Israel. But we have to remember that a year ago, the Israeli, with their Mossad, came to Beirut, to the heart of Lebanon, to the capital of Lebanon, assassinated a high ranking of Hezbollah. So did Israel violate the sovereignty of Lebanon? Yes, it did. And Israel been trying to sabotage our airspace on a daily basis. Is it a violation of 1701? Yes, Israel make incursion to Lebanese land every day.
All right.
Kill and shoot at our armies. Is that violation of Lebanese integrity? Yes, it is. And we have the right to defend this land.
I want to try and bring Bassem into the discussion because we just got a few minutes left. Israeli officials have touched on something which I think you've kind of alluded to, Bassem. They say Hezbollah is trying to open a new front against Israel from the Golan Heights on behalf of other countries like Syria and Iran. As a member of the Lebanese parliament, as a member of an influential bloc, do you share that concern?
We are concerned that Hezbollah is involved in Syria and in the Golan. We've always said that Hezbollah, when Hezbollah fought radical elements in Lebanon, were considered shaheeds and martyrs. But we cannot really say that the presence of Hezbollah in Syria has given us any security. And now tying us up to the civil war and tying us up to an Iranian reprisal. Even Hezbollah said what they did was in reprisal for what happened in Qnaytra. Which is a very serious matter. As far as security is concerned, there is cooperation between Hezbollah and the Lebanese armed forces. But there's cooperation on Lebanese soil and for Lebanese sovereignty.
Okay, Bassem, I want to give Kamal just 30 seconds before we have to end things. So hopefully I can give Nicholas the last minute here. Kamal, your response to that. In your understanding, is Hezbollah trying to open a new front from the Golan Heights?
Well, Hezbollah, by his action in Syria, saved Lebanon from these Takfiri and put an end to these Takfiri. Otherwise, we would have been fighting those Takfiri inside Beirut and throughout Lebanon. The preemptive action by Hezbollah saved the country, and Mr. Shab knows that very well. Their work and their
it hasn't inflamed tensions, attracted more attacks between Sunni and Shia neighborhoods that we've seen?
No. If you look at Egypt, where we have Shia in Egypt, where we have Shia in Libya, there's all confrontation between Takfiri and this government. The issue is not between Sunnah and Shia, it's between Takfiri and everybody who's against these Takfiri, including Saudi Arabia, which actually fighting those Takfiri. So the fact Hezbollah took the initiative and took the fight to the Takfiri, saved Lebanon and prevented Takfiri from this Lebanon, and Mr. Shab have to admit this fact.
All right, I can see Mr. Shab is not in agreement there, but unfortunately, gentlemen, we are out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there for now. I'm sure we're going to have a chance to talk about Lebanese politics again in the not too distant future anyway. Let's thank our guests, Kamal Wesney, Bassem Shab and Nicholas Snow.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching the show. As always, if you have anything to add, just head over to our programme